Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was on this day in 1996 that Tupac Shakur was fatally shot and died. Some have suggested that he's still alive somewhere, which maybe is true, hopefully true, but by all accounts, by what most people think, he did in fact die after being shot in Las Vegas in 96 following that Mike Tyson fight. Now, Tupac is extremely iconic and relevant in terms of hip hop culture, in terms of culture as a whole, in terms of 90s culture, in terms of tragic elements in the culture. All of these things are true. Film culture as well. There was one point where you could argue, perhaps in the early 90s, that he was more iconic for his film work in the eyes of non hip hop listeners than he later became in the hip hop world, including those who don't listen to hip hop. But in the hip hop world, the musical evolution of Tupac was something that was very interesting. He was very young when his first solo album, Tupacalypse Now, came out in 1991. But there was a maturity to his lyrics that defied his young age. There was a vulnerability, there was a naivete, but also a sense of experience. And the theme of contradiction in his music is something that would become increasingly prevalent and sculpting of his legacy with each subsequent album that he did. His first album, though, is considered legendary. It's considered timeless because of the diverse amount of topics he discussed in his lyrics, the fact that he touched on very taboo subjects like teenage pregnancy. Brenda's Got a Baby, an all-time classic. And you could really say that a lot of the album was conscious rap. Brenda's Got a Baby, definitely conscious. Part-Time Mother, great Stevie Wonder sample there, definitely conscious. And he was someone that was sort of born and raised with a lot of conscious themes around him. He had a legacy of Black Pantherism in his family. His mother was very, very much an activist. And he moved around a lot, which meant that he, had to sort of create a new circle of friends in any new place he had, which isn't easy for anyone, let alone someone who didn't grow up in wealth, as Tupac definitely didn't. He moved from New York to Baltimore to the Bay Area. He considered himself an Oakland rapper in his early days. And in many ways, it's kind of funny that he came to represent the LA scene almost more iconically than the guys born in LA by the mid 90s. But we'll get to that in a bit. His second album really showed that he had arrived because, again, in spite of his young age, Strictly for My Ends, his second album from 93, featured Ice Cube and Ice-T, two all-time lyrical legends of the West Coast and LA scene. And in many ways, his most mature album of all was Me Against the World from 1995, because it had that perfect mix of a more sophisticated production than his previous two albums. It had the conscious themes. It had it had him starting to introduce some of the thug life themes that he was exploring on a side project. It was in many ways the perfectly balanced Tupac album that was released in his lifetime. But it was around that time that he was arrested, and this is what led his life to totally change, because it was Suge Knight, the CEO and co-founder of Death Row Records, who bailed him out. And this changed everything for him, both musically and in terms of the circle of friends he was around. He was spending much of his time, certainly in public, with Suge Knight. And he also, at this point, became very well acquainted with Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. We all know California Love, his most iconic track produced by Dre for Death Row Records around that time. But the relationship between Tupac and Death Row resulted in the album that is considered his absolutely quintessential album, All Eyes on Me. Wonderful production. And while the conscious themes are still there below the surface, the thug image is much more front and center than it was on his previous albums. And a lot of people over time have debated why that is. And I think there's some truth in all of the various arguments that people have put out. He was made into someone in touch with that rebellious lifestyle that was just saying, F the world, because of what they did to him. Arrests, being shot at, conspiracies to harm him. And that really drove him to this impassioned state. It's almost like there was always a gentleness to him that maybe some other musicians in any genre didn't have. And when you kick someone who's innocent that much, you can awaken something that's really, really powerful. And I think that's kind of what the world did. Some would say that it was a commercial decision because of Death Row Records being known for that kind of gangster rap music. I'm not so sure because there were elements of that dualism even on his previous albums. So I'm not totally sure I believe that. I think it was really more to do with what was happening in his personal life. But that album, Double LP, was absolutely sensational, wonderful production, great, great collection of songs. And it was at this time where he was both on top of the world and in his lowest point ever because he had a big record contract. He was on top of the charts. His face was everywhere. But he faced incarceration. He had fallen out with the man who was his friend, Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G. And within this, he began to be the face of a growing rivalry between East Coast and West Coast rappers, something that many of the artists involved at the time would later say was something that was really invented by the media, but many of the artists played into it. It was fun until it stopped being fun. It was good publicity. And Tupac really took that to the highest level with his diss track "Hit 'Em Up," dissing a Biggie and the man then known as Puff Daddy and that whole scene at Bad Boy Records in New York. And we still don't really know who shot him. Some people think it was a member of the LA police who went up to Vegas to shoot him. Some people, you can do the research. I'll put it that way. If Taylor Swift can tell you to do the research on who you want to vote for, do the research on who you think killed Tupac or whether he's dead at all. There was an album released posthumously. Well, there were a lot, but the one that was really the only posthumous release where the whole album was more or less complete in his lifetime was the Don Killuminati, the 7 Day Theory, and this was credited to his sort of alter ego Machiavelli, but it was in many ways what I consider the lost great Tupac album, and it explores even darker layers of the psyche than All Eyes on Me. Another really good album, and of course, Death Row, both with Suge and post Suge released a lot of stuff that Tupac did posthumously that was either incomplete or semi-complete the producers worked on. But why is he a legend? I think that he's a legend because there's always something fearful and curious, and to some people attractive, about someone who goes from being an innocent idealist to someone who gets caught up in a crazy system and ends up becoming this Machiavelli character by the end. It was this transformation from his earliest digital underground days to what he was doing just before he got shot that I think is the main reason that he's such an attractive figure in culture. The fact that he died, allegedly, I guess, the way he died is also part of that mystique when you look at people like Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin who died younger than they should have. There's always that. The fact that he was an all purpose celebrity, people knew him and knew his story, even if they didn't listen to any music. People knew him from the stage. Well, from the screen rather, for his acting. People knew him because of things like he dated Madonna for a while. All of these things really made him, in many ways, the most iconic celebrity of the 1990s. And it's just a pity he didn't live to see the end of the decade the way that a lot of the people around him did. So here's to Tupac, a true legend, a figure of, I wouldn't say contradiction, but a figure who evolved in very interesting ways. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.